right, everybody, I think we're officially ready. We've had our mindfulness moment, and now we're ready to learn from each other and with each other. So thank you so much to David and his team at Startup Space for coming up with a phenomenal agenda today. We're going to learn a lot. You'll have a chance, again, as he said, to please stay on mute for the moment and come unmuted at the end when we want to have discussion and questions. But in the meantime, I want to officially welcome you in my new role, brand new role, as the Executive Director here at Startup Champions Network. But many of you on the call I know and remember from my time involved as a member of SCN, and also involved in some of the eShip goals calls that have been happening around the community. So just thank you for the chance to welcome you today to learn with us. This is the most amazing group of colleagues I've ever been a part of, so I'm very thrilled to be heading up this organization and providing these kinds of learning opportunities. So you can always email me. I did not put my email up there, but I can put it into chat later for feedback afterwards, or just to say hello and share more thoughts on the subject. But without any further ado, I'll get into, first of all, what SCN is, and then David will take it away with this learning webinar. So for those who do not know and are maybe not members yet, Startup Champions Network is a network of members, over 100 of us now actually, around the United States, and we work in all kinds of different ways to remove barriers for entrepreneurship. And a lot of us work on culture change and change management in our communities to present a new way of managing an innovation economy and a new form of economic development. And for those of us who do that work, we call ourselves ecosystem builders. And our mission as SCN, as a membership network, is to provide those of us who do this work with the connections, the different resources and professional development that we all need to cultivate thriving and inclusive communities. And especially in this new era, make sure that entrepreneurship is for all. So that's our mission. And how we do that is by providing value to our members, first and foremost with relationships that are authentic, trusted, and that really matter. So we gather twice a year to value those peer relationships and have them get deeper. The next gathering is actually very shortly. We will be together in San Antonio, Texas on the 10th through the 13th, where we will have a live case study of the San Antonio ecosystem. And we do those live case studies twice a year in different locations. So you'll hear more about when the fall gathering will be, but in the meantime, if you have interest and haven't bought a ticket yet, you can still get tickets to come to us in our San Antonio Summit. We also give you access to the latest and best practices, this webinar being an example of that. We will have a variety of learning courses that are going to launch in 2020. We'll tell you more about that in a couple of months. And we have existing what we call challenges that are deeper engagement, so that you can practice and learn some of the skills that you need to take your work to the next level. The Ecosystem Health Challenge is an example of that. We actually just wrapped a cohort up all around the country, people who are learning how to create impact metric scorecards for their community. And so we work with various partners like Startup Space to launch, test, and iterate the newest ideas in the field and share those back with you. So thank you for being a part of this active community of practice. And finally, we do have tools in activation. When you're a member, you can go on our member site and get discounts for things, tools like Startup Space and other terrific perks. So we try to provide as much value as we can to our members and encourage you to learn more about joining if you haven't already, and reach out to an existing member to find out what they love about SCN. And so with that, I turn things over to David, and we'll have here, I think, about an hour and a half to learn together. If we need more time, we've put it into the calendar. So hopefully you'll get a little time back at the end, but we also have it in case we want to keep going on the subject. All right, thanks, David.
Yep. Thank you, Kristen. And thank you all actually for taking, I know, very valuable time out of your busy days to come to this webinar. I want to make sure that we've got content here that's educational and also collaborative so that we can all learn from each other. And I'm very grateful for giving us this opportunity to share some of our best practices today. We'll also hear from Meg, who is part of the Minnesota ecosystem, a case study around some of the work they're doing with their entrepreneurship ecosystem. So hopefully you'll stay engaged, and hopefully we'll breeze through this and we'll open it up for a discussion at the end. A little bit about me. My name is David Panraj, and I am the CEO of Startup Space. I founded this organization in June of 2018, and I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about why we came up with Startup Space But before we do any of this, given the diverse nature of this audience, and given that we have different perspectives we come into this call with, I would like to first start by defining some of the commonly used phrases on this call so that as we go through this, it'll make sense in how we use these terminologies. Plus, it will also reflect our worldview and our mission. So the most basic question is, what is an entrepreneurship ecosystem? We look at entrepreneurship ecosystems as a community of people coming together to create an environment that provides entrepreneurs in the locality the best probable chance to create wealth for themselves and their communities. The key words here being community, local, and wealth creation. Because in spite of us living in this global boundaryless world, businesses primarily rely on local support to start their businesses. And so one of the themes that we see a lot in our communities is this hyper local focus to help businesses. The next question then is, how does an entrepreneurship ecosystem function? Again, here our view is that an entrepreneurship ecosystem provides first access to develop technical skills, then access to mentors and business coaches, people who can help prevent false starts, a group of willing early adopters who can provide feedback on prototypes, access to capital, a diverse talent pool of sweat equity risk takers, a government that supports and incentivizes entrepreneurship, and really a culture that celebrates innovation and entrepreneurialism. It's really that culture that kind of underpins an ecosystem. And where we've seen thriving ecosystems, they have all of these different components that we will address later in the call. But we look at an entrepreneurship ecosystem as comprising of these core elements. And of course, the next logical question is, why do we need an entrepreneurship ecosystem? And here I kind of want to take us back a few hundred years, and I think all of you will have your own stories around this. But my personal story is this. When we lived 200-300 years ago, our grandparents or our ancestors, entrepreneurship was probably the most common form of business opportunity. I got experiences firsthand. I'm from India. My parents have been social workers their entire lives. And I grew up in tribal villages where where everybody had a specific task they did. There were farmers, cattle owners, potters, bamboo weavers. There were people who helped with childbirth, etc. But they all kind of made the ecosystem, and they all were independent businesses. They bartered, they sold to each other, and they had to be entrepreneurial to actually support and sustain their families. And from there, when the Industrial Revolution came about, people went to work for corporations, and entrepreneurship, of course, took a back seat. And the result of that was that it ended up with large disparities in wealth between people at the top of the ladder and people at the bottom of the corporate ladder. And we also kind of lost some of our innate abilities to use ingenuity and to innovate and create wealth for ourselves. And if you kind of fast forward to the last 50 years with the arrival of the information technology age, we've been able to kind of bring back the ability to innovate and also create the incentives to create a product or a service, because now with the information technology age, you can actually compete with large corporations. You can compete with established businesses and be able to create real wealth. However, the big challenge that we've seen in our journey and also talking to our clients and people who are ecosystem builders, that the big challenge today is that this information, which is power, is not uniformly accessible to everyone. And so the resources needed to start a business are not equally distributed. As in, all entrepreneurs don't have the same starting point or a level playing field. And therefore, we need ecosystem builders, ecosystem providers, and we need an ecosystem that helps break down barriers and helps level the playing field for entrepreneurs. So I'm going to kind of, from here, hopefully this resonates with you, but I'm going to kind of shift a little bit of a focus to talk about what does this entrepreneurship ecosystem look like and who are these entrepreneurship ecosystem participants. Our worldview is comprised of 13 different ecosystem personas or profiles. We start with startups. the definition of that is actively working on a business. Then we have entrepreneurs. And again, not all personas are listed here. This is kind of to give you a visual. We have about 13 different personas that I'm going to kind of walk through here. The second is entrepreneurs. These are the tinkerers, the people who are in all of the meetings, who are actively looking to partner or start a venture at any given time. Probably some of them are serial entrepreneurs who've started and exited other businesses, but are not actively in the middle of a startup. The third is a service provider. This is lawyers, accountants, web developers. These are people who help service the ecosystem. Most of them might have a for-profit title or a social enterprise or nonprofit, but essentially they are providing services to help startups start businesses. The next one is mentors. We work with several mentor networks, university-based mentors that are part of a formal program, but mentors essentially serve to help entrepreneurs with providing them real-life examples, help them with connecting them with potential clients, helping them with breaking down barriers around uh, accessible resources that they need to access, etc. Also, business coaches would kind of fall in this bucket, but mentors, business coaches, these are people who are helping actively break down barriers for startups. The next one is investors. We don't really position ourselves as an investor platform, and we don't actively cater to that, but this is a critical component of an entrepreneurship ecosystem. Access to capital is, and investors play a critical role there in being able to provide different forms of investment. It could be a bank, it could be a local angel, it could be an investment fund, or it could be like a basic, pitch competition that helps bridge the gap and help startups keep going. The next group is faculty. So we work with a lot of university entrepreneurship centers, and the faculty play a critical role in these early stage entrepreneurs, the students, etc., who are also part of this ecosystem, training them in how to start businesses, what are some best practices, and then giving them an early view into entrepreneurship. The next group is community organizers. This is primarily the people we work with and what we call our clients, but these are ecosystem managers or providers, people who have a general mandate to help support and provide for the ecosystem. This could be public-private partnerships, this could be government agencies, it could be entrepreneurship centers, etc. But the community organizers broadly fall under these buckets. The next one is corporations. These are the WeWorks and the JP Morgan Chases of the world. They play a critical role in innovation ecosystems. They also provide funding through, if they're a bank, through CRA dollars, or through the WeWork, the space to work in, etc. But they also have a vested interest in the success of entrepreneurship ecosystems to drive innovation, to drive new technologies, and they are a critical component of the ecosystem. The next one is government agencies. Here, we think of things like policy, advocacy, being able to also provide funding, programs like SBIR to help with early stage or seed funds, or to even provide regulations that incentivizes people to start businesses. And with the election cycle coming around, you'll see a lot of focus on trying to drive policy and engagement at various levels of the government, and they are a critical component as well. The next piece is nonprofits. Mainly here, it's 501c3s that support entrepreneurship, and they are critical as well. Next is ecosystem builders, like all of you on the call. And the last two are students and community members. So students are part of the entrepreneurship centers at the universities, and then community members are people who advocate generally for entrepreneurship. The reason why we have to look at our world in terms of personas is because everybody interacts differently with the ecosystem. And you can't have a one size fits all ecosystem program. You have to create custom journeys, and kind of we've built our platform to also provide this custom journey based on the type of persona, because what a startup is looking for is very different from what a mentor is looking to provide. And you want to make sure that every one of these personas feel enabled in the ecosystem. And then I'm going to go from here one level deeper, and you'll see that this presentation basically is like a funnel. We start at the most broadest terms and kind of whittle it down, eventually getting to some ecosystem analysis around key decisions that data will help us provide. But it's basically a funnel. And the next step here is talking about what does an entrepreneur look like in today's world. So what is the profile of today's entrepreneurs? And again, this is our worldview. It's a pretty broad topic, but we kind of look at today's entrepreneurs as people who represent the gig economy. Most of them either have a side hustle or consider this their side hustle. They also are hyper connected and know how to find information. So they are really good at sourcing information that's out there that can help them. And they're also early adopters of technology. And this is important because they actually adopt technology at a faster rate than the rest of the ecosystem. And as ecosystem builders, it's kind of up to us to help provide these emerging technologies because there is no such thing as a non-tech company anymore, right? Even if you're starting a Main Street business, you need to be plugged into the internet and you need to have a good website and you need to be able to have digital solutions for your customers. So in this technology age, uh, entrepreneurs are at every age, even older entrepreneurs are really tech savvy compared to the rest of the ecosystem. And trying to talk about what are the challenges, what have we heard from them, and what have we heard from uh, uh, through them and from our clients about their challenges. And some of this is also coming from data that's collected by SBA and by SCORE and other leading agencies. But they face navigational challenges, and in some instances, they're not even aware of existing resources. We've seen these firsthand when we do a gathering at one of our when we launch a city, we do a gathering of the key influencers. We find that even within the key influencer community, they are not aware of resources that are available for entrepreneurs. And so the first biggest challenge is navigating the ecosystem and the lack of awareness. The second one is that when they need to scale from a freelancer or a solopreneur to a small business, a lot of scale challenges around capital, around finding a co-founder, etc. So there's challenge around scale. The third one, which is more for emerging entrepreneurs, is the lack of knowledge on how to start a business and the fear of the unknown. And this, I think, was a study conducted by the SPDC, where they showed that one of the primary reasons why entrepreneurs are not starting at a faster rate uh, in the last 100 years is because of the fear of the unknown. And I think that there we have a huge opportunity to educate, to empower, and help them start. And then the last one, which is what we're going to focus a lot more in the rest of this presentation, is that underserved entrepreneurs are impacted disproportionately. That underserved entrepreneurs have a much harder time starting businesses, and it's not from them not wanting to. In fact, we've found in a lot of our cities that immigrant and other underserved communities start businesses at a faster rate than the general population. But they have a much harder time and a much bigger hill to climb to get access to the resources that they need. So that is really the story behind Startup Space and we why I came up with uh, the need for Startup Space. And it's my own personal story. So I am a second-time entrepreneur, and in my first business, uh, it basically crashed and burned after 5 years of putting everything into it. And when it closed down, within like 3 months of it closing down, the first thing I found was that there were all of these resources in my community that I was not aware of. And that's because startups and entrepreneurs, while they're really hardworking, they also have blinders on because they feel like they can solve this puzzle and they can do this. And when you have blinders on and you're trying to execute and trying to find that first customer and you're trying to make that first sale or trying to scale, you will find that you don't have access to the information that's around you to help you. And so I had to close that business. It was really painful, and it felt like a huge letdown. But the key takeaway from that business was that we need to find a better way to connect the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so I launched this business in June of 2018 with the simple goal of how do we help connect entrepreneurs better. And we actually just launched as a peer networking forum. Uh, all we wanted to do was connect the ecosystem and connect entrepreneurs to each other. But over time, we've heard from clients that say, we love this, but we also have other needs around connecting entrepreneurs. And so we'll go a little bit more into what a resource is. But we first started by calling a resource just the ability to connect with each other virtually. And today we're in over 150 cities. We have over 12,000 ecosystem participants in 65 countries. with about 3,500 resources on our platform. And really the vision for us is to help entrepreneurs navigate the ecosystem and find the resources they need to launch and grow their business. And we also then want to help the ecosystem providers by creating efficiency in their activities, helping them measure the impact of their work, track the journey of their entrepreneurs, and like one of our ecosystem providers put it, unlock the philanthropic support needed to provide ecosystem resources and meaningful programming for their underserved communities. So I'm going to then talk a little bit about what do we mean by an ecosystem resource. An ecosystem resource is essentially any resource an entrepreneur needs as an input to launch or grow a business or service. So on Startup Space, we consider ecosystem resources as an accumulation of well-categorized and hyper-local services, the keyword here being hyper-local organizations and programs that, that span a variety of interests, industries, and specific stages of startups and communities of interest. And I'll talk a little bit about all these key words that I use. They're very specific and intentional. But for example, communities of interest. So if you think about communities of interest, we'll dive a lot deeper into this, but this represents a large portion of the community that's underserved. And we'll talk about how, you know, when you say it's for all, sometimes you might unintentionally leave out the groups that you're trying to support. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into that in a second. But let me just kind of paint a little bit of a better picture on what these ecosystem resources are. So the first ecosystem resource is any program or organizational support services that serve startups and entrepreneurs in some capacity. So this could be service providers, this could be peer mentor networks, etc. But these are programs or organizations. The next one is a curation of all the events that are happening locally to prevent cannibalization of events or participants and provide a good way for entrepreneurs to navigate all the different events that are available for them to get new tools or to find other people to work with or to network, etc. The next one is physical locations that provide connections. So this is like entrepreneurship centers, co-working spaces, etc. We're also talking about government programs like workforce opportunities through local agencies, etc. But physical locations that provide this service. The next one is peer-to-peer support. So this is the ability for entrepreneurs to connect with each other, collaborate, build things together. And then the last one is the ability to share information. So stories, news, etc., all in one place. Then there are other ecosystem services that we also support. Like, so for example, if there is a cohort management needed to run, let's say, a co-starters program. So co-starters uses us to help onboard their programs and help get the applicants to the point where they can launch their businesses or get started with the co-starters program. So with cohort management, it could be a mentorship network that is needed, but we consider all of these as resources that are needed to help launch an ecosystem, and not just the service provider aspect of it, but the entire spectrum of all the ecosystem services that are needed. And then before we kind of switch tack, the last question is, how do we serve the underserved entrepreneurs? Or, you know, the word underserved can be also interchanged with underrepresented or groups that don't have the empowerment needed to launch their business. So, or even the word that commonly comes up is underestimated. But we can better support these underserved entrepreneurs by empowering them and giving them the same probability of success for their ventures. So in the gap analysis section later in the presentation, we'll look at one such underserved community to better understand what it takes to provide a level playing field. The need from our partners is to also better connect these underserved communities. So for example, the Hmong community in Minneapolis or the Arab community in Detroit. We've got the LGBTQIA+ community in Denver. And then there's these disabled entrepreneurs entrepreneurs who have disabilities across the communities who need a better experience in being able to start a business. And so for us, these are all the inspirations why we wanted to make sure that every resource we provide is specifically tailored to these underserved entrepreneurs. For example, we have a platform that is both friendly to use and compliant for people with disabilities like visual impairment. We also wanted to democratize our resources and make it open source, so anybody in the country can go in there, and no matter what community we've mapped, they can get access to that community in real time through going to startupspace.app/resource and be able to enter their location and get access to resources wherever they live. And so whether, and the reason for this is if you live in, let's say, small town Illinois, your closest resource might be in Chicago. So to empower them by giving them a complete open source database of real-time, fresh, up-to-date content on resources they can use to start the business. And then we also use our data to help with providing accurate information in some cases where there could be outdated information by providing a peer moderated set of resources. We also activate the service providers by giving them an incentive to keep their resources fresh and be able to directly connect with entrepreneurs. And then we provide a robust way to make sure that every 6 months there's an entire review of all the ecosystem resources to make sure that it's relevant. Because what we found is that the moment you map an ecosystem, it gets out of date. And so how do we kind of come up with modern ways to keep your content fresh? And then the last thing is we believe that there should be several doors to accessing information. So we have a mobile app that auto geofences you to your community and allows you to get real-time data. We also partner with local storytelling organizations, for like an example, In Good Company Detroit. And we use their storytelling platform to bring to life the stories of their entrepreneurs. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation, but bring their entrepreneur stories to life and then help connect through their stories, entrepreneurs to resources. And then we also directly connect with our partner sites and allow the information to reside also on our platform, on our partners' platform. So there's another entry point to the resources. So I'm going to pause here just to catch my breath. And then I'm going to switch to the next part of this discussion. But before I do that, I want to kind of quickly just go over, what we covered in the first part. It was a lot of information. And so I thank you for staying connected. We started with what is an ecosystem, how does it work, and why do you need it? And then through there, who does it serve? And are they effectively being served? And kind of that's where we came in to say there was a lot of gaps in how they were being served and how we could use modern technology to help better serve them. And through serving them, can we find the groups that are most disadvantaged, and how do you help serve those groups through the resources? So kind of that's the first part of the presentation. And then I'm going to spend the next few minutes kind of deep diving into the data and talking about why data is so powerful. One of the sayings that in my previous career we talked a lot about was, in God we trust, everyone else bring data, right? Because data provides a very objective view of the world and can be a very powerful tool in the storytelling and the unlocking of philanthropic support for your organizations. So we'll go right into that next. And our worldview, and this is not my statement, by the way, we've kind of been able to track it down to Peter Drucker and others who've said this, but what cannot be managed cannot be measured, which is actually first part of a two-part sentence, which is what cannot be managed cannot be measured, and then what cannot be measured cannot be improved. So with this, the first part, it was all about how do you manage the ecosystem? How do you provide tools that can passively collect information on the communities you serve and allow you to be able to present a picture on who is it that you're serving? Are you actually moving the needle, and why you need better resources to support that ecosystem? We did that by providing a 24/7 living, breathing ecosystem that gave every persona that I had mentioned earlier an incentive to use the platform. And I'll talk about a couple people here that are basically profiles. And then from here, we'll kind of dive into the data. But the first part here is we're going to talk about an entrepreneur. For an entrepreneur today, what we found is that they, even when they as they start their business, they're instantly hit with a whole bunch of fees and stuff, like, you know, they have to get a CRM, and they have to get like a way to be able to manage their inbox, and they need to place to keep their files. We decided that we wanted to kind of start opening up tools for entrepreneurs. And so what you'll see on the right hand side is a set of tools for entrepreneurs. If you click on the about, you'll get a business model canvas, you'll get a place to store your files, you have a way to track your venture, and if you're a service provider, also to manage your resource business page. And on top of that, we also gamified it for the entrepreneurs to kind of incentivize them to do the things that will make them successful. So working with our partners, we identified what are the key activities that an entrepreneur needs to do on the platform, and basically gamified that aspect for them. And so we created this incentive for an entrepreneur to be on the platform, and we made it 100% free. So there is no way an entrepreneur can actually pay for this platform. There's no payment gateway for them to pay anything unless they're using it for co-working space or for accessing some tailored content. Other than that, for accessing every other feature that I mentioned, it's absolutely free. So you can come in here, you can find events, check into the events, or add those events to your calendar. You can go work on your business model canvas. You can share your business model canvas directly with your mentor. You can also go in here, if you're part of a cohort, you can apply for the cohort. You can go through the review process. If you're part of mentorship, you can track your mentorship sessions. Everything in one place, both on the desktop and on the mobile, to give entrepreneurs a one-stop shop to be able to manage their business, so that they don't have to say, okay, I don't know where my file is, I have to bring a jump drive, I have to go search for an email, etc. A one-stop shop to run your business. The other persona is a mentor. A mentor can come in here and do all of their activities tied to mentorship in one place. They're through their mentorship dashboard, they can actually schedule and see all of the mentorship sessions. They can also track all of the mentees, give them work to do. You can see you can give them weekly goals that they need to pass through. And you can also, through your dashboard, see the ratings that your mentees have given you as a way to transparently show how effective you are, basically automating the handshake process. And this is not a call to go over features, but I wanted to kind of give a snapshot of when we say we want to support entrepreneurs and we want to manage their work, you want something like this. You want a place where you can track uh, passively how the entrepreneur navigates the ecosystem, so as to then collect data from there. What we found was the alternative was to just use surveys, which immediately creates biases or creates gaps, because you can't get the entire ecosystem to fill out the surveys, or it becomes very manual and you lock out 6 to 8 weeks just to run your surveys, etc. So the first part was to manage, but the managing actually leads to the second part, which is the measurement. And you need to measure, because what you cannot measure, you cannot improve. Again, not from me, it's from some famous person who said this, but I think we all agree with this statement. And so what we did is we put together an automated real-time dashboard that said ecosystem managers don't have the time to be going in there and tinkering with the data. So how can we create for the ecosystem managers a simple way to be able to get all of their metrics in real time in one place? And so for that, we put together key metrics around surveys completed, total number of programming hours, being able to see how many resources were available for entrepreneurs, what were some engagement activities like questions asked or answers given, are there people filling out your business model canvas, are there new ventures being started, etc., and be able to measure this as periods of time among other dashboards. So this is the primary dashboard, but every activity comes with its own dashboard. So you don't have to create pivot tables. You don't have to go and run Excel files, etc., to be able to get operational information in real time to be able to make decisions. So the first part was manage. The second part was measure. But if you can't really do the third part, which is really the icing on the cake, you won't be able to kind of tie it all together. So at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the storytelling aspect of this, but that kind of brings it all together, which is you got to first be able to manage, you got to be able to measure, and then you got to tell the story. And we'll kind of get to the storytelling piece towards the end of this deck here. But and I'm also going to show you some of the best practices that we've seen around the storytelling. Okay, so the next piece of this is now at the very heart of this presentation, which is how do we analyze our ecosystem and how well do we know our ecosystem? Here's a snapshot, and all of the data presented on the call today is all real data. There's none of this is made up in any way. All of this is pulled from the system and has been corroborated by the ecosystem providers. Here's a snapshot of the ecosystem of the Commons in Champa, which is the Denver ecosystem. And there are two slides here we'll go through, but the first slide is to kind of break down across the 13 different personas, and we've highlighted the biggest ones here. You can see that this ecosystem has a really standard way, which we think most ecosystems should show in terms of representation, the majority of which are startups and entrepreneurs. And then you have service providers, mentors, and then a whole bunch of other ecosystem providers on the bottom. The startups and entrepreneurs, again, here it could be kind of interchangeable for a part of it. There could be a little bit of an overlap, but they represent the people actively starting or looking to start a business. And you can see the majority of the ecosystem, over 50%, about 66% of the ecosystem lies in startups and entrepreneurs. The third biggest category is service providers. And again, it's a really good snapshot because that's kind of how you want your ecosystem laid out. You have really good active participation from the service providers in your ecosystem, that they represent all the different types of services that you offer. We track these services across 24 different categories, starting all the way from accounting and finance to technology services. And in between, we also talk about lifestyle stuff like health and wellness. We also talk about food and beverage industry. So we kind of track these across 24 different categories for the service providers. And then the fourth big component is mentors. You want a strong, active, vibrant community of mentors and business coaches who can help these entrepreneurs and startups navigate the ecosystem, be able to look at them for help in breaking down barriers, get connections to critical clients or key partnerships. But the mentors play another big role. And then, of course, you need the rest of the ecosystem. You need the community organizers. You need the investors and the government agencies, et cetera, to be active in your ecosystem. But we found this to be a thriving ecosystem, completely decentralized, which is for us a key metric. You know, there's no hierarchies. And I think even Kaufman and other partners talk about what a thriving ecosystem looks like with a decentralized network of organizations that come together to help support the ecosystem. And I'm going to go even a level deeper to kind of show you how cool these numbers are. It kind of got me excited when I was doing the analysis for this presentation, is that if you just take the startups out of that and break the startups down, we also track more granularly what type of a startup you are. And we measured across 6 stages. If you look at these, this is, for me, at least for me, a perfect breakdown of a mature ecosystem. You have the majority of the people in ideation trying to start a business. You have a percentage of people that are tinkering with or trying to create MVPs of their product. You have another portion that's in proof of concept. But the second biggest category is revenue from customers. So people are actively selling and trying to create scale. You see investments are small, which for us is positive sign that that ecosystem is mature enough that you don't spend a lot of your time trying to get investments. And then you see the last stage before exit, which is growth, not being really big as well, as in you're able to get to exits. And again, this is a snapshot. Not all of our entrepreneurs are tech entrepreneurs. In fact, we support rural entrepreneurs as well. And they also kind of fall into these buckets around how do you go about starting a business. These investments can also be investments from grants, from government agencies, et cetera. But this is what you want to see your ecosystem look like. There's a healthy amount of people starting businesses, a healthy amount of people selling products, and you have people in the growth stage of your ecosystem. And to assist with this, you kind of have to look at what are the services that are available and what kind of expertise is there in your ecosystem. So we correlated this with just taking entrepreneurs and mentors and mapping them to what expertise did they say they had. Again, this is data coming from self-reported metrics on the platform. We found that the majority of the people supporting here were in tech and software, which for Denver is not very surprising, kind of is part of their fabric. There were people in marketing and PR, and there were people in business setup. Again, just things around starting a business. You can draw lots of different correlations from this, but for us, it was interesting to see the kind of expertise that lay around starting businesses and how you kind of break down the expertise that is available for your ecosystem. Maybe something coming out of this can be to explore further, are there enough legal services needed to help start a business? Or should we be investing in more R&D type organizations, maybe put an additional maker space in there, right? This leads to further drill downs and then having meaningful conversations with ecosystem providers, with government agencies, creating policy, et cetera, to help create assets in your ecosystem. All right, so we'll go now to the question that started this whole webinar. How well do you know your ecosystem? And so for this, we're gonna have to take a little bit deeper dive into a specific type of underserved communities, what we call for whom we need to provide services. And so these entrepreneurs that you see listed on the left-hand side, these are the underserved communities that what we call communities of interest. And for them, when there is a resource that is specifically targeted to support them, we call it a specialty resource. This whole how well do you know your ecosystem is going to be about, do you have the right resources to support these communities of interest, and why not looking at it from this lens is going to disenfranchise a large portion of your underserved entrepreneurs. So I'm going to kind of first talk about these specialty resources and why this is important. So identifying gaps in mapping methodologies represent opportunities for entrepreneurs to expand their network. And specialty resources represent a unique opportunity. It can be defined as programs, organizations, events, etc. But the idea here is that these are not resources what we call for all. And a quote from one of our entrepreneurs in Detroit when they were being interviewed, they said, there are all these programs that's going on for entrepreneurs that can help them, assist them. There is funding. Those things aren't even in their mind. They don't even consider these programs. Like that's just for something that's for someone else. And this is coming from an underserved community. So when you go and say, oh, we've got all these resources, we've got 500 odd resources, they don't think those resources are for them. They feel like those resources are for someone else. So being able to create easily accessible and highly visible specialty resources within an ecosystem provides a greater sense of personal connection and representation to groups that have been traditionally underestimated in the realm of entrepreneurship. And by bringing these specialty resources forward, a community is not only acknowledging the diversity of their local ecosystem, but also actively working to support and foster entrepreneurship for all the individuals within their local community. This ultimately strengthens the economy as a whole and provides a much richer and equitable experience for everyone, regardless of where they are in their entrepreneurship journey. And we'll talk just about the slide here. So we're looking here at data from the Minnesota ecosystem. Again, this is real data. And what we found is that there are 92% of the resources are listed as general resources, as in they don't have a earmark or they don't have a tag for specialty resources. Only 7%. And one of the things that we're working with Meg, and Meg is going to come on next and talk about some of the amazing programs they have in place. And they actually commissioned working with Startup Space specifically for some of these reasons, to be able to unlock all the different potential ways in which these communities of interest could get access to resources that are made specifically for them. And I'm going to talk about just one of these communities even further. So I hope all of you know what a returning citizen is. So these are citizens that have been, that have just gotten out of prison. And we looked at this data and we looked at why it is so important. And I think there is already today a national conversation about helping these returning citizens. But we were looking at the data specifically for Minnesota. And we found this was 2019 data. There were 7,300 returning citizens. There was a 73% recidivism rate without programming, but with programming, it dropped to 27%, which means the likelihood of them ending back in prison. And to do this, you can't just offer them general resources because your community already has general resources. So we started digging into what are some programs that are available for them and what is it. So they did a pilot program where they actually offered workforce training and some workforce programs plus entrepreneurship programs as a pilot. And this pilot is what saw this almost 2/3 reduction in recidivism rate for these returning citizens. And so these are the kind of metrics that kind of help create very meaningful conversations. So when we say, how well do you know your ecosystem? We're talking about these kind of metrics. How well do you know in how well you've been able to break down the data to know how well you're serving your underserved entrepreneurs or people who've been disenfranchised or people who've been marginalized? How well are you supporting these entrepreneurs? So the last part of this, and I'm going to turn it over to Meg after this, was I talked about storytelling. You have all of this data, you've done all of this analysis. Now what? And here's a great quote that basically talks about the idea that graphs and charts, all of them are great as information sources, but you're not going to draw at the heartstrings by just presenting these numbers. You got to bring these to life. And again, really, we're sharing here best practices. So this is, you can go actually check this out. It's called In Good Co Detroit. This is the storytelling partner for our client NEI, which is New Economy Initiative. They came up with this idea of being able to talk about the comeback story of Detroit from the lens of the comeback stories of all of their minority entrepreneurs. So they went across the city and looked at all of these entrepreneurs who are bringing their business to life. And I guarantee you, you can't go through one of these without shedding a tear. It's so powerful in being able to show these underserved entrepreneurs bringing their businesses back to life, and Detroit as a city actually coming back to life. If any of you have been to Detroit recently, you'll see this city's totally come back to life and it's vibrant, it's thriving. There's a great entrepreneurship ecosystem underpinned by a lot of great resources. But that is so critical in being able to bring these stories to life, and through these stories, be able to connect with resource providers that can then fill these asset gaps in your ecosystem. And I'm going to pause here and let Mackenzie, who's on my team, transfer control to Meg. But this kind of concludes the portion of the presentation that went from talking about what is an entrepreneurship ecosystem to what is Startup Space's role in it. And then as an ecosystem provider, how do you kind of use data to be able to understand programming gaps and be able to fill it and tell stories? And really, this is a case study today. We're happy to take this offline with you and kind of show you our examples, or even work with you on your own examples of how you can bring these stories to life in your communities. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to Meg.
Thank you all for being here today. A big thank you to David and Kristen for putting this together. We are proud SCN members and we call ourselves a part of the Startup Space family. So excited to be with so many folks today. I think as I put this together, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is how we built Forge North and a little bit about our community here, because I think it's really important. And as we prepped for this call, we talked a lot about building trust and the fact that you can't take on these digital tools successfully without having that trust in your community. So I'll spend a little bit of time just talking about our community, where we've been, why we saw the need for Startup Space, how it fit a need that we had described but actually had no solution for, and then walk through a few of our learnings and sort of next steps for the tool here in Minnesota. So I work at Greater MSP. We do regional economic development in 15 counties here in Minnesota. We are a partnership of over 4,500 different individuals that represent about 300 organizations. So a really large group working to ensure that the competitiveness and inclusive growth here in Minneapolis-St. Paul is accelerated. So if you've heard anything about our region, you've likely traveled through our airport or heard about our high quality of life, our 10,000 lakes, or if you are from a southern climate, you have heard that it's really cold here. We actually have a thriving business community. We have the highest concentration of Fortune 500 companies anywhere in the nation. And so we've really grounded our business community in that headquarters economy. We've built over 50 Fortune 500 companies here in Minnesota. 16 are still formally HQ'd here. There are another 5 or 6 that have a large bulk of their staff here but are HQ'd other places, and then a handful that have fully moved their headquarters outside of this place. But that presence of headquarters has really made this a unique place for business, but it meant that our regional economic development focused highly on attracting and retaining those mid to large size companies, looking at the talent they needed to succeed. So entrepreneurship really wasn't on the top of the list for the Minneapolis-St. Paul region until about 15 years ago. And so between 2005 and 2015, we saw this increase in momentum around entrepreneurship. And we saw the formation of Minnesota Cup, a statewide business plan competition, which is now the largest in the nation. They give away over $500,000 in non-equity funding each year. We saw our first co-working spaces formed, our first angel network. We saw a fair number of industry-specific trade associations pop up, and we saw our first accelerator program. So really between 2010 and 2015, we saw a significant amount of momentum around entrepreneurship, but there was really no coordinated effort to manage that or to create any connectivity. Everything was sort of happening in isolation. And so in 2014, we had the first Twin Cities Startup Week, and that was the first effort to really coordinate everyone that was working in entrepreneurship for 5 days to do some things together. And so that first year in 2014, there were 35 events where folks partnered. And after 2014, 2015 grew a little bit. I think there was about 60 events that year. So there was obviously momentum. But coming out of 2015, there was a group of partners that said, what are we doing the other 360 days a year? How could we come together and do work the same way we do it during Startup Week, but on a more continual basis? And so that became breakfast. And in a really grassroots fashion, folks on this page and some others started to come together every other week to just talk about if we had some sort of effort, if we had an organization focused specifically on startups and innovation, what would that look like? What would we do? What are things that have been on our list and we as individual organizations can't tackle? And so as we were having those conversations, we realized we needed to do some research and we needed to have data to back up what we sort of anecdotally were talking about. And so in 2016, we partnered with Beta, the group that runs Twin Cities Startup Week, to do a study of our community. They interviewed over 250 entrepreneurs here locally. And what we found is that we were doing a lot of things right. So we have that high quality of life. There was a significant amount of momentum at this point. We have our strong corporate community. There's a lot of talent here. We have some great universities. And it's really affordable. So whether that be true cost of living for founders or cost for founders as they hire some of their early talent, this is a place where you can really stretch your dollar. And so we had a lot of strengths, but as we looked to what do we need to do to ensure that 10, 15, 30 years from now, our startup community is still really strong and thriving, we found some key areas. And those were broken down into a hub. And the concept early on was a physical space to share ideas and to find talent and make connections. We saw the need for more funding options. So we were looking at a hub, more funding opportunities, both venture capital, angel investing, state dollars through SBA and SBIR, any type of funding options. And then culturally, we needed to do some things specifically around risk. So our Scandinavian heritage, we always joke, causes us to be a little bit risk adverse. And so to have those moonshot ideas, we needed to really change the narrative around risk. And then inclusion. We have some of the largest racial disparities in the country. So in terms of access or opportunity for our underestimated founders, in whatever sort of community, as David talked about, that would be, we really saw a need to take that and tackle it head on. But we knew that we wouldn't do that alone. So it was not going to be just a group of 15 individuals that were eating breakfast. It was going to be a much larger effort. And so with that, we formed Forge North to tackle these 4 issues and a number of others. And so to explain Forge North, I'm going to quick switch to a video and allow one of our partners, Maria Plessel from Ministar, to explain.
We didn't design Forge North to be a new organization or a new program. We created it to get things done together. My job is to help lead Ministar. We're a nonprofit that's built to serve an incredible community of technologists. For years, our events have helped tech entrepreneurs demo products and introduce new ideas. We play an important role in the ecosystem. So do others. Think about all the programs that exist, from competitions to incubators and accelerators. All of them exist to serve the risk takers who are working every day to solve problems, start ventures, and scale their impact. We built Forge North so we can accelerate their work. It's how I've been able to partner with accelerators, connect to the food or healthcare community, or refer our demo participants to new investors and programs. It's how we've shown up as a team everywhere from Texas to Toronto, and it's inspiring us to dream bigger. Entrepreneurs travel different paths and they move at their own pace. Some of them bootstrap and some raise venture money. Some need mentorship and expertise that others don't. If we're not working together as a community to connect more inclusively, to celebrate each other more proudly, to challenge ourselves to dream bigger, we're not only letting those problem solvers down, we're limiting our own potential. We worked with the Greater MSP Partnership because we needed a strong platform to collaborate. Each of us has a superpower. We need a lot more heroes to join us in this effort. It's hard to describe Forge North because I can't compare it to anything else. It's a rally cry. It's how we work together, and it's where we're going next.
So we created Forge North, and it's this movement, rally cry, coalition, and it wasn't something our community was used to. We are a headquarters economy, and we are used to sort of the traditional either corporate structure or nonprofit structure, and this was something really new and different. And it meant that we didn't have capacity to start a fund or a new program. Those were things that were happening throughout our community, and we have a lot of partners working on those. But as a new entity, we couldn't take those things on. And we had plenty of programs now in the community. So this was 2016. And we really set out to act as a connector. And so what we said was, if we can't start something new, how do we act as the connective tissue between those already doing the work? And so what that meant was that we didn't go after directly connecting with entrepreneurs early on. We connected with our entrepreneurial support organizations and our local investors and our corporate innovators. And so we knew that in doing that, we couldn't do it digitally. And so we took that breakfast concept that we'd created early on, and we sort of blew it up to create more awareness of what was happening throughout our community and develop really a better referral network between our ESOs. And so we focused at that level, and we created 3 peer groups that met either monthly or quarterly. And so over the last 2 years, these peer groups have built a significant amount of trust. They have traveled the country together to share our story. They've shared learnings with one another. We're seeing deal flow between our local investors and the presence of new funds in town. We've seen a large corporate innovation conference come out of a team of our financial services corporate partners. So there was just a lot of momentum in getting people together and building that trust. And it was really the basis that we could then take and continue the work digitally. And so we formalized a relationship with Greater MSP to give us the backbone support and a home to house the work within. And we, by doing that, ensured that we were positioning entrepreneurship at the core of our regional economic development strategy. So at that point, we wanted to take these efforts directly to entrepreneurs. And we were looking to develop a strategy to do that, which was pretty obviously going to need to be digitally. We wouldn't be able to connect with entrepreneurs the same way we were with our ESOs. So we were doing an extensive online search of what that might look like. We had a few partners locally who still wanted this physical hub, but as we did more research and talked further, it was really about density. They wanted to create density, and that didn't have to be a physical place. So we made the leap as a group to truly talking about what a digital solution would look like. And we went back online and set out to find something that had been created that might work for us. And the truth was we found nothing. And so we, in version 1.0 of what now exists as our MSP Startup Compass on Startup Space, we built something custom. And it was a very simple search engine that we housed on our website. And we started to aggregate a few resources. And so we had that up and running, and we had been talking about what that might look like in the future. And one day I got a call from Lily, who now is moderating the Q&A and works on the Startup Space team. And she said, I have this really cool guy, David, speaking at our 1 Million Cups. You have to meet him. And 3 minutes after I got off the phone with Lily, I got 2 texts from folks in the audience that said, this company just presented at 1 Million Cups over in St. Paul. You have to meet this guy. And so I got in my car and drove over to 1 Million Cups. And 30 minutes later, David and I had our first conversation. And over the next 6 months, we quickly developed a plan to roll out Startup Space in Minnesota. And our primary focus was to focus on the resource tool and the community calendar. So those were the 2 things that really mattered most to our community. And so those were what we focused on building out. So it was September of last year, 2019, that we signed a statewide Super Hub contract. And why we did that was so that there would be 0 barrier to entry for any of our partners. We wanted to make sure in that rollout plan that no one would have to find dollars to be part of this or to take advantage of the platform that we were building. So we signed that contract, and by December had populated the tool with over 500 resources. So as I say that, it sounds fairly easy. We're talking about 9 months of time, but when I look back, it was anything but easy. Adoption of any sort of technology, as I'm sure you all know and have struggled through, is very, very difficult. So we've been working extremely closely with David and Lily and the rest of the Startup Space team to find ways to get local buy-in, leverage that trust we've built with partners, and remind both our partners and entrepreneurs that the platform has not been built to replace relationships. It's been built as a path towards building the right relationships faster. So we really have had to focus on that with partners. And so over the course of the last year now, let's call it, we've learned a lot, lots of learnings. At the end of the day, that's really the overarching point of this case study, is that we learned a lot. And so as I talked about, the creation of that statewide hub removed barriers for anyone to leverage the platform. So I think the learning of, in however your community looks at using this, for entrepreneurs, it will always be free. And I think that's absolutely incredible. But also amongst your partners, how do you create that cooperative nature versus competitive and ensure that folks aren't having to fight for grant dollars or otherwise compete with one another to take advantage of the platform? I think the second big learning was that ownership of the hub was really important. And so how did we create ownership from the community? We made it really easy for them to access and leverage the platform, but how did we make it feel like it was theirs? And so we did that by, one, not naming it the Forge North Community Hub, but naming it the MSP Startup Compass. So really focusing on centering the entire tool as a community tool, not as something that was Forge North specific, but that had really been built for the community. And in doing that, we had a great response rate from other organizations that said, we want a community hub, or we want to leverage the tool in this way, because they felt like it was their own and that they had the capacity to do that. The ability to claim resources has continued to really accelerate that shared ownership and accountability. That was something that the Startup Space team built out in a way that I think has been really beneficial, because it ensures that our partners own their own resources. They can make an update at any time. If there's an error or a change in their staffing, they have the capacity to do that. They also have a capacity to all the data then on their resource. The same with our community hub owners. They have full access, and so they feel that ownership. Again, the platform not being a replacement for relationships, I think that was the biggest pushback I had early on was, well, we need to be building trust and we need to be building relationships. And this is 100% not a replacement for that. But what we were hearing from entrepreneurs is that they would take 30 coffees only 6 months later to have the right coffee. And we want them to have the right coffee or the right meeting much sooner. Data privacy, this is something that David can speak to on the back end. Everything is 100% secure. It doesn't mean people don't worry. And so that trust we built with partners early on has become really critical. It's come in handy when folks trust us. And since we trust Startup Space, we've created that trust sort of on Startup Space's behalf. But something that we've been working through as we bring on more community hubs and more partners, figuring out how that data privacy works, who actually owns what data and how that's shared amongst our statewide hub is something that we're still learning about. Populating the tool, adoption is really hard. Data entry and upkeep is also really challenging. So we were lucky enough to bring on an intern about 20 hours a week from September to December to help us in populating those 500 resources and I believe over 350 different community events. Without that basically part-time employee working on it, we would have never gotten that done. So I think really looking at after you build the trust, after you get the buy-in, there's a significant amount of work to be done. Also in tagging. So both in the actual data entry initially, but then in tagging, we worked with Startup Space a fair amount in looking at what does that tagging look like? What does that taxonomy look like? How are we tagging things? Sort of what's the threshold, both in the types of resources, in the stages of companies that they're serving, and then also the communities that they serve. And so the fact that we've done that probably a little bit on steroids, we've been overly concerned with that, has meant that when we go in and want to look at mapping or analyzing any of the data, we can do that very successfully because we have all of that great tagging and we did all of that work up front. So definitely a big learning on our end. And then I think something that I knew but surprised me is that this platform has been maybe more important for our community partners here early on. So as we talk about creating that referral network and having stronger referral partners, this tool has allowed our ESOs, our investors, our corporate innovators to become significantly more well-versed on what resources exist in the community. And so for entrepreneurs, it provides that direct pathway, but for our partners, it also provides an opportunity for them when they're meeting with founders to say, actually, I'm not the right resource for you, but I know somebody who is. I can get you their contact information via this platform. And so we've seen a lot of sharing in that regard between our partners. So we've learned a lot. We've built out the tool, been really focused on the resources and the event calendar, and now we're looking to the future. So we have a lot of things sort of on the horizon, a lot of really great developments. So I think the one thing that's next on our list is to just look at everything else the platform offers. So whether it be the business model canvas or the chat functionality, there is so much that the platform offers that we currently aren't utilizing the way we could be. So that's sort of our first step, is to just look at how do we roll out some of these other features and educate our partners on them. I think the best way for us to do that, at least here locally in Minnesota, is doing some in-person work. So we're looking at creating office hours where once a week, entrepreneurs or partners could come and connect with someone in person. And whether that be finding a resource, leveraging the tool, so actually getting onboarded to the tool and finding a resource, or if it's sitting down with Lily and saying, how do I use the resource? Or how do I access the data in my community hub? Whatever that might look like, creating an in-person embodiment of the platform, I think will be really important for our community to continue to build that trust and continue to get folks onboarded and get that user adoption we want to see. I think it's going to take some in-person work, at least here in Minnesota. We're also exploring some new partnerships with some organizations like Launch Minnesota, so our statewide effort behind entrepreneurship and innovation. And that will take the platform to a whole new level, truly making it statewide. So we set the program up and the hub up as a statewide hub, but I'm one person, and our work has been fairly metro focused thus far. So now looking to partner with folks like Launch Minnesota and other groups in greater Minnesota to really create this to be something bigger than just the metro. And that's really exciting because it goes both ways. There are resources available in greater Minnesota to our metro-based entrepreneurs and vice versa. The great part about Startup Space is that there are also resources around the country for entrepreneurs to leverage. And so we're seeing that start to be something that our program folks and our entrepreneurs are interested in checking out via the platform as well. So we also have more community hubs we're onboarding. We've had Social Enterprise Alliance and SBA as our sort of early adopters. They both run part of the desktop version of the platform on their websites. So that's really incredible that all of the data exists in one place and we're seeing it showing up on multiple websites. We also are setting some pretty big goals for our community. So using the tool to help us monitor those, we'll have 3-year goals around enterprise participation, early stage capital, and equity. So what does representation look like in our community? And so this tool allows us to track those and to track those in a way we've never been able to track before. So it goes back to David's comments on our populations of previously incarcerated individuals and those underestimated communities. So that's a big scope of work to look at how do we map those things, how do we address the gaps and the opportunities in our community. But with this tool, we just have potential we've never had before. And so the previously incarcerated individuals is a really great example of one of those communities that we'll want to serve and that we've identified as a pretty big gap. There's some real opportunity there. But as I mentioned, we also have some of the largest racial disparities in the country. And so our equity goal is going to be a big part of what we're doing in the next few years. And we're setting a big goal for ourselves. By 2023, we want the representation of entrepreneurs in our programs of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to be representative of our demographic population. And so as we set that goal, we actually had no way to track it. And that's, I think, a lot of us, when we set big goals, there isn't an easy way to track them. And so we're looking at utilizing Startup Space to actually get our programs onboarded and have them tracking their participants via the app, which would give us then the back-end data we need to say, how are we doing? Where are we at? What do we want the future to look like? And so the tool just has endless opportunities. So I've been incredibly thankful to the Startup Space team. We've done a lot over the last year, but I think in the next 2 years, we're going to just see tremendous growth in the state of Minnesota in our use of the program and in the impact that the platform has on our community. It's giving us tools and opportunities that we just wouldn't have otherwise. So I'll end it there and hand it back to David. I'll include my contact information in the chat, but happy to always talk about any of our experiences or our learnings further.
Awesome. Thank you, Meg. And we've had an amazing experience working with the Minnesota ecosystem. And like you said, with the programs that are coming in the near future, we are excited for what this means to connect the entire entrepreneurship ecosystem in Minnesota. So thank you for presenting. And like you said, people can reach out to you. We'll also share this deck after the call. So if people want to go through your slides, they have that opportunity. Okay, so we're almost at the Q&A. I have just one more slide I want to talk to, and this is really the call to action. So you've heard all this. So what? What now? And what does this mean? There is no sales pitch here. There's nothing to buy. But really thinking about the fact that all of these entrepreneurship ecosystems kind of have the same challenges. What is the role of an ecosystem builder? And what we've seen in the communities we go into, so like Meg mentioned, in all the communities we go into, one of the earliest things we do is to rally the entire community together. And there we find that the ecosystem builders play the biggest roles. So when you bring a community together to launch, the ecosystem builder is the one that makes all the connections. One classic example that most of you might know is Hassan Bazi in Detroit. So when we signed our contract with NEI, Hassan was the first people to raise his hand and said, let me help you navigate this ecosystem, bring the key ecosystem providers together, rally them together Lily and Meg were that for Minnesota, but the ecosystem builders have a critical role to play as a super connector, helping break down the barriers in the ecosystem, being the eyes and ears of the entrepreneurs, and helping ecosystem providers and other players in the ecosystem understand why it is important to create tailored programs for underserved, underrepresented, and underestimated entrepreneurs, to serve as that servant leader, saying that, we're not looking at hierarchy, we're not looking at as gatekeepers, but we're truly trying to help break down barriers, and we will serve as leaders to help entrepreneurs scale, and then really create awareness to be able to tell the ecosystem providers the need to have a robust ecosystem map, to have robust tools to help entrepreneurs navigate the ecosystem, to help break down those silos. A lot of ecosystem providers are not aware of some of these apparent gaps that we all know about. And there, the role of the ecosystem builder is critical in creating awareness. And then the last one is for the ecosystem builder to bring the community together. In a lot of our communities, we have programs like breakfast gatherings, or we'll have like a monthly roundtable, etc. And these are all things that an ecosystem builder can serve as a leader to kind of rally the community together. And none of these actually require any money, right? These are all free ways in which an ecosystem builder, just from their hyper connectedness and from their awareness of the gaps, can kind of rally the community together. So that's our big takeaway for you through this call, is to kind of knowing the power of having a well-connected ecosystem, and knowing the power of being able to translate some of these apparent gaps right to the top, where the policymakers, the ecosystem providers can actually act on these, are all things that we think empowered ecosystem builders can take on. And with this, I'm going to open it up for questions. I will have questions that you can also direct to Kristen or to Meg or to I. I'll also unmute all of your microphones, but please go back on mute if you are not going to be speaking. But I just wanted to make sure that this was not hard to, that it was not hard for you to be able to access your unmute button. So with that, Mackenzie, you can take back control and just go to the next slide, and then we'll open it up for questions.
David, this is Lily. There were a couple of questions throughout the presentation, so I'm going to read a couple of those questions out. This question is from Guy to you, David. Are the metrics available over time, allowing to see improvements or pre-post an initiative?
Yeah, so all of the metrics are tracked over time. Some of the metrics that we really hone in on are the journey of the entrepreneur, to see if the entrepreneurs are actually going through various stages of a startup. And then Meg had mentioned earlier about, and I'd love for Meg to kind of jump in here as well, is that when they tracked over time, to also be able to track exits, or is the money circling back into the ecosystem, and are people actually being able to go the full circle, or if there is some area in which they're tracked. So yes, almost all our metrics are tracked with time being a primary function.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
This question is more directed towards some of the resources. What relationships currently exist through Startup Space with military veteran entrepreneur ecosystems?
Yep. Okay. So we have a few examples of veteran entrepreneurship programs or services. One of them is one that's in Tampa. It's through what we call InLab at the Hillsborough Community College. They have a program specifically for veterans, where if you go through your program, they will also give you initial funding to help you launch a business. We've worked with Bunker Labs in Minnesota to help track an event for them. So yes, we are actually not the providers. We work with the providers. So if there are veteran organizations that require support, we're happy to engage with them. But we have a few on our platform that do it today.
Excellent, thank you. This question is for Meg. Meg, there was great interest about your intern support and who and how you were helped to populate the data and tagging. And also, as the network is growing, who updates and keeps that data current? So that I'd like to open that up to both Meg and David. You may have some feedback on that as well.
Yeah, it is a great question. So the early population of the actual data was done by our partners and myself. And so prior to actually onboarding with Startup Space, that early version 1.0 of a searchable tool we had was probably populated with about 100 resources. So that's where we started, and those were sort of our core community partners. And what we did when we moved into a conversation with Startup Space was we emailed all of those individuals and said, who else do you know? Do you have a list that lives on your website? Do you have an Excel spreadsheet that you keep? Please help us figure out what this community looks like and where resources exist. And so we populated through the community a fair amount of data on a lot of different community resources. And then once we had that data, we emailed out to all of those resources with a survey that basically listed off the questions that we would want to ask in terms of getting their data up to date. So it did ask for some of those tags. It did ask for a little bit of other information. As you may suspect, not great survey responses. So just in general, in doing big surveys like that, it's really hard to get a high response rate. So what we did when we were able to bring an intern on board was actually myself and that intern went through a list in partnership with Lily, who we were lucky enough really had some familiarity with our community. And we actually tagged, I would say 75% of their resources ourselves. So we took a best guess. We did our best to pull from their website and pull the most current data. But it definitely was a labor of love and a lot of work. Now that the network is growing, we are seeing more and more folks claim their resource and make the updates themselves. So as they have programmatic changes or a change to their website link or staffing, we're seeing that starting to happen organically where I don't have to be involved. We do still have a fair amount that we're having to just monitor and watch. I think by next year, I hope that that's changed, and I hope that over half of the updates being made are happening from our community partners, if not more than that. But we're still in that phase of getting some adoption, and I think I'm looking forward to bringing on more community hub partners where they are leveraging the tool to run much more of their program or more of their efforts, which will mean that they're on the platform more often, they're leveraging it for other things, and I believe that will create some comfort with the platform. It will get us that adoption, and then they will be making those updates themselves. So definitely still a learning curve that we're trying to figure out.
Thank you, Meg. David, this question is for you. When it comes to Startup Space mapping locations that are a little bit more challenging or more spread apart, do you have some best practices on the way that we have set up ecosystems that are rural or that are more of a corridor or multiple cities?
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Lily. I'll first start by also kind of chiming in on what Meg had just mentioned. So in Minnesota, you know, it's very robust. The process is very robust, but we do have, I'll just go on mute. I'll just, let me see if I need to mute somebody really quick. 1 second. If you're not speaking, please go on mute. Thank you. So in other ecosystems that might not have the same level of resources or might not have the ability to bring on an intern, what we did is we provide 20 hours of admin support for each of those communities a month. And we do this through a back office. We have some folks sitting in Wisconsin. We also have our own community ambassadors help with this and our other ecosystem builders. But this 20 hours of admin support for free is essentially all that small community needs to be able to keep their content fresh. And we did this really as a best practice, just in case a community doesn't have enough resources to either find an intern or dedicate additional time to do this. And that's kind of worked really well in bringing our best practices from other parts of the country to that small community to help map their ecosystem. And then, of course, activating local key influencers is super important. And so that's another piece that is something that we look to identify very early on by getting to that location and understanding who those key ecosystem influencers are to help us map that ecosystem accurately. And then it's also an ongoing conversation. I'd mentioned earlier about the fact that the moment you map an ecosystem, it's instantly outdated. So Meg had mentioned about allowing resource providers to have access to their resources to keep it fresh and incentivizing them that way. There are lots of other things that we do, knowing the fact that resources will change quickly over time. And how do you make sure that they're fresh? We also allow people to provide feedback directly on the resource as a way to peer moderate it. And then for rural communities, a question that just came up. So yes, there could be like corridor cities, or there could be a city that's kind of a group like a triad or a triangle, etc. That's why the primary filter is actually geofenced radius. And you can start at 5 miles, go all the way up to 300 miles, and it doesn't take into account city boundaries. It takes into account the radius from where you're located, so as to provide resources in the vicinity. No matter, let's say you're sitting in Detroit, but you want from Ann Arbor, it will take the radius all the way up to Ann Arbor if you choose that filter, and still be able to get a resource in that city. And that way we've been able to kind of address this idea of corridors or specific rural cities that might not have a resource in their network, but is part of a bigger group of cities that are together, or communities that have come together to provide a resource.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Meg, can you, and David, you may have some input on this in terms of how we have worked with other clients, but Meg, can you speak a little bit to your events calendar, how the events are curated, and how that is then not only on your website, but also on the app? And do people then need to double post that, or how are events shared?
Yeah, great question. I, again, 2 years from now, hope that I am telling you we are not double posting anything, but we currently are still double posting a fair amount. So we populate probably, again, 75 to 80% of those community calendar events. So I am on all of the newsletter lists of all of our different community partners, as I'm sure many of you are. And we work with our intern or myself to get those events as we see them populated into our community calendar. We're starting now to continue to push our partners to populate that calendar themselves. Again, there's an adoption curve where we're just not quite there yet, where partners are actively using the app consistently enough to be posting themselves, but we're working on it. I hope, again, in 2 years' time or in a year's time, however quickly we can make it happen, that we would see a lot of our community partners embedding the Startup Space desktop calendar on their own websites. So you look at a co-working space or another community program, they're going to have their own calendar displaying their events or their close partner events or things that they're partnering on. So my dream is that we would actually see everything being managed on one back end, but that might be showing up on 100 different web pages as well as the app. And so as Lily mentioned, we have that happening on our website. Social Enterprise has that happening on their website. We're in talks with a few other folks about how to do that for them. So the same way everything lives on the app, it also lives on a variety of our web pages so that it's really easily accessible on desktop. And again, we're learning a fair amount, and so there is a lot of that duplication still happening, but I think the benefit of this platform is that in the years to come, we should be able to eliminate that. And if that's a co-working space actually leveraging the app to run their entire co-working space plus the calendar, or it's that co-working space embedding parts of Startup Space into their website or what they're currently using, I think there's a lot of potential and hope to see us get there sooner rather than later.
Meg, thank you for that answer. David, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive, and that really goes back to the many doors idea for us, is to make sure that that we reach out to entrepreneurs where they source their content from. So the more we can do that, the less we are going to have to affect change or have to influence them to get to the resources. And that's something, working with partners like Meg, trying to understand how do we best have all of these resources at their fingertips, be it through websites, etc.? How do you allow them to inform in terms of events that they're hosting, etc.? How to really simplify the connection point? And some of the things we're looking at is artificial intelligence, using voice commands, especially as we look at persons with disabilities. How do you kind of make it inclusive and simple and easy? Those are all like our 2020 buzzwords: is simple, easy, open access. So, but I think that yes, a couple of years from now, we'll be able to kind of say that we've kind of solved that piece of the puzzle.
Thank you, David. David, I have a question that, as location, as you mentioned in the presentation, that current data shows that location matters when seeking to build ventures. How does Startup Space help ecosystems or new entrepreneurs that help them find the optimal location and great programs? Like, for example, Minnesota Cup is in Minnesota, and in many other communities, they may not have access to a program like that. So how does Startup Space help communities or ecosystems notice those gaps and work to help them start to create programming to support their local entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I love this question because that's what I'm most passionate about, and I spend most of my time. It's kind of cross-pollinating ideas and experiences between different ecosystems. And I exclusively, in fact, in most of my conversations with Meg, with Pam from Detroit, or with any one of our ecosystem partners, the question is almost brought up every single time. What are other ecosystems doing? What are other programs from other ecosystems that we can lift and move here that are working really well? And I think that is part of the Startup Space vision, that as you travel across the country, you can simply go into your profile, change your location, instantly get plugged into that local ecosystem. But on top of that, also for ecosystem providers to be able to bring the best demonstrated practices across the country into their community. And that's also one of the most exciting reasons we're partnering with SCN, is because that being part of their mandate, we feel that they give us the best platform to be able to share case studies like Meg's and other case studies where we've seen great work happening to be able to cross-pollinate that. And also programs like, MinCup, and trust me, every city state has its own little program. And where there isn't one, starting to have those conversations around. We've seen this recently. We had, mentioned to one of our partners about a local convening of ecosystem builders that we had experienced ourselves, and how impactful that was, to see if we can replicate that in another ecosystem to kind of help connect the ecosystem providers. So that's an ongoing conversation, and that's part of the network effect of having a simple and easy to use platform that you can quickly find resources in, is that it creates the ability to then cross-pollinate. So yes, I hope that helps answer that question.
Yes, thank you, David. A couple of you have asked whether we will be sharing the deck and the resources, and the answer is yes. We will follow up to be able to share both the resources that David had mentioned within this, and also the deck. I am calling for any final questions. I do notice that we have one more. So David, this is for you. What can be next steps for a local community to start out building their ecosystem after this presentation? I believe you mentioned a couple of action steps, but could you either reiterate some of those, or do you have any additional ones that would be good for a community to start?
Yep, I would definitely ask that ecosystem builder to reach out to Kristen first to see, can they plug right into SCN? It's a great community of ecosystem builders. Almost everybody is always sharing best practices, helping each other out, even with simple things like, hey, do you have a template to fill out this grant? Or, it's a great community. So I would say first step, talk to Kristen, see if you can get plugged in, and then reach out to some of your ecosystem providers. We've seen everybody from a local bank to a public-private partnership or a 501c3 kind of come together to say, we need something like this in the ecosystem. It doesn't have to be Startup Space. It could be any one of the ecosystem mapping tools out there, but to kind of rally people together and then go out and help find these connectors. I think those are all great first steps. Also to inquire to see if there are tools already in your ecosystem today, or somebody already doing something like this. That can be a great starting point. And of course, if you'd like to talk to us, you can go to our website.
I'm sorry, David.
Also,
could you-
I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to chime in too to second what David's saying about resources and tools. So there's a couple of other things I would add to the list, David. One is Kauffman Foundation's eShip site has a playbook for ecosystem builders that's worth consulting. And also, I want to point out from Meg's story, one of the things I thought they did that was so smart and clearly has worked was just getting together over a meal. So if there are like-minded groups, you know, the funders getting together, maybe the businesses that are traditional in the community and entrepreneurs, that's a starting place to build some trust. It's very low point of entry. You know, even if you haven't gotten to the point where you're ready to start mapping, just gathering and convening is a great first step in whatever community you're in. So I would say hats off to Meg for what she did there in Minneapolis, St. Paul, because I think it's one of the things that we did in my community in Massachusetts. It really helps. People like to get to know each other before they start doing things together.
Kristen, thank you so much for that input. David, in closing, I have no remaining questions that have been posted. David, do you have anything to say in closing?
Well, I would only just say thank you so much. I know that this is a long webinar and it's hard to stay focused for so long. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to Kristen for giving us this platform to share our story. And then thank you to Meg for sharing the journey of Startup Space and Forge North, and then also the Minnesota story. So just a big thank you. And then Kristen or Meg, if you have anything else to add in closing.
Just a huge thank you to Meg and to you, David. You guys were awesome. I'm sure folks got a lot out of this. So thank you so much.
I'll continue the gratitude. Thank you both to Kristen, David, Lily, Mackenzie, the whole Startup Space team. You're doing really incredible things. We've been extremely grateful to be part of this journey, and also to be part of the SCN network. Looking forward to San Antonio in a few weeks. And as David said, a great network to be part of. I think both getting together over a meal in your local community, but also reaching out to these networks that exist nationally. I know I have learned so much from the SCN and the Kauffman communities, and it's just been invaluable to have those shared learnings and to understand what's happening, what's working, what's not working. So excited to be part of this, and thank you all for your time today.